Hello folks, I wanted to give you an update on the garden. Haven't done that in quite a while. We're now near the beginning of August, and this is the upper garden. If you hear shooting in the distance, my neighbor's practicing again, so no big deal. And this is sweet corn, vine crops, and an overgrown jungle of sweet corn down there. I'll get to that in a minute. But what I've had here is this row here has been summer squash and zucchini. I've been picking from this for about 2 to 3 weeks now and getting lots of fruit off of there. The summer squash especially is very prolific. It's doing well. This next row here is mostly butternut squash. It's a fall squash, so they're growing, but they're nowhere near ripe yet. And this row was pickling cucumbers. And I've been picking off of that. In fact, my wife has made 2 different batches of pickles already from them, but the vines are already starting to wither. I don't know why it keeps doing that to me every year, but it seems to be doing it again this year. So we just had a week with 4.5 inches of rain here, so everything's a bit soggy. I did water once during the mini drought we had. I don't know if it was timely enough or if I should have done it more, but that's what happened. My sweet corn here, as is usually the case, I get plenty of weeds in between the stalks, not in the rows. I've been, as you can see, the rows in between the rows are tilled bare. I've been doing that with the tiller. I do that every year, but it's almost impossible to keep the weeds down the middle. I've got to figure out some kind of herbicide to just kill all the weeds in this garden and just grow corn. That's the only way to have a better yield. But this is Temptation. We've had a few cobs off of it already. It's just starting to mature. Cobs aren't huge, but the flavor is very good. It's a bicolor, sugar-enhanced variety that we like, and I'll probably be picking some tonight for supper. There's nothing better than being able to go right to the garden, pick a fresh cob of corn, and in 5 minutes have it in the boiling water ready to be cooking and on your plate in another 15 after that, or 10 minutes after that, whatever it is. It doesn't get any fresher than that or any better. And so this is one of the blessings of having a garden. You get to do that this time of year. So corn isn't great this year, but it's not bad considering. As I said, I probably should have watered a little bit earlier than I did, but I didn't see any of the leaves start to shrivel. They were dark green color. There was no fading in the color, so I thought, well, it might be all right. But we'll see. We did get, like I said, this past week about 4.5 inches of rain, so that made a difference. How much it'll make a difference for these cobs that aren't quite finished yet to fill out, I don't know, but we will see. So down here a little bit more. I didn't finish showing you the vine crops. This is a row here of decorative mini pumpkins, the little round ones, the little orange ones that almost like gourds, that I decided to plant just for kids and things like that. This is a row of Halloween pumpkins, at least 4 hills. And then in that jungle, there are 4 hills of spaghetti squash, and they're doing very well. I'm getting a lot of them. They're not ripe yet either, but they're coming. On the far end, I have a couple watermelon vines and cantaloupe vines. Usually they don't do well for me, but I always seem to throw a few in just to try. So we'll see what comes of them. And as I said, this part of the garden was a disaster. For whatever reason, the weeds were just absolutely out of control from the beginning. Again, as you can see, I tilled through in between, but in the row itself, where you couldn't really do much pulling weeds out without taking corn stalks out, I've got this jungle. And then, to make matters worse, the low part of the garden here, shortly after I planted these in that far end, everything drowned because we had some rain early on in June, and that was underwater, and that killed some of the stuff that started to come up. So I had to do a replant on that. And I do have some stalks that are coming up there. It's not as weedy because I went through and tilled everything under again and then replanted. I guess it was probably mid-June. So this part of this row looks a little better, and I may get a few cobs off of that. This is a new variety that I just experimented with this year. It's called a quad sweet variety. I guess it means 4 times sweeter than normal, and it's called Nectar. So again, I don't know how it's going to turn out, or if I'll get anything to taste, but I'm going to next year take this entire garden and move it up higher in the field to get out of this wet spot that we keep having here. It used to be that it worked fine, but now with the way these summers have been, it's just been a mess. So I'm just going to try to move everything up a little higher out of the wetter spots and see what we get then next year. So this is the upper garden. I'll be back to you with some report on what's going on in the lower garden with the tomatoes and beans and peppers, and the experiment with the onions and the potatoes under the hay and so on. So I'll be back. How are we doing, folks? It's actually been a couple weeks since I did the first part of this video with the upper garden. Now I wanted to give you an update on the lower garden. In this time I've been doing a lot of harvesting. It's been busy. All the Temptation sweet corn's been picked from the upper garden, and a lot of squash and zucchini, pickles. We've put a number of batches of pickles away. But now let me show you the lower garden. We're also getting things out of here. This year, for the first time in a few years, I actually have beans. These rows of beans, the one on the left are wax beans, the yellow ones, and the green beans are on the right hand side there. They're Blue Lake variety. Managed to keep most of the rabbits off of them this year because of the fencing around this lower garden. So the yield has been pretty good. There's still an awful lot of white blossoms on there, so I got a lot more to go. It's doing really well for me as far as beans go. We've put it, I don't know, 15 quarts away in the freezer already, so we're doing well with that. The other thing that I've had this year is I've had a pretty good explosion of my tomato plants. I had put 36 out. I think I had showed you that earlier. And they are just growing wild here. These plants, this one right in front of me is about as tall as I am, about 6 feet tall. And it's got a lot of green tomatoes on it. I've also got some that are just, they've kind of fallen out of the cages or grown beyond the cages, shall I say. The cages and stakes, they're just everywhere. I know a lot of this, especially in this corner of the garden, is because of the enriched soil from all the chicken manure. Yeah, from these guys. Because when my wife cleans out the chicken house, she dumps it into this corner of the garden. That's also why the sweet corn there did so well. I'll talk about that in just a second. But these tomato plants are, everything's late. I think I had told you that I had to put everything out late because of the way May was with the frost. So these didn't go into the ground. They weren't transplanted into the garden until early June. But we had a pretty good hot summer. It was fairly wet early on, then we hit a dry spell, and then I watered once. I probably should have watered twice. But after that, then we had about 4.5 inches of rain here between 2 storms, and they really pushed. In fact, I also had another problem going on here that I just addressed. I've started to see on some of these tomato plants early blight. That's where the leaves start turning kind of a brownish color and have black spots on them. Early blight is not as bad as late blight. Late blight will destroy the fruit too. Early blight just takes out some of the foliage, and if you can treat that, then the rest of the plant can remain healthy. But if you get hit with late blight, you're in trouble. I had one year where I lost like 95% of my tomato crop because I get hit with late blight and I didn't know what it was. But I just used a combination chemical. I can't remember what it's called, but it's for all kinds of plants, including tomatoes, for all kinds of funguses, mildews, and early and late blights. And I sprayed them with this last week. With some of these chemicals, you're not allowed to harvest for so many days afterwards, but with tomatoes there's no delay, so I could do that and still pick them. And so that's what's been going on here. I know this looks like a jungle. Here there aren't really all that many weeds. There's some mixed in, and I pull them as I'm in there picking tomatoes, but most of these are just tomato vines that are just growing everywhere. In fact, down here, these cherry tomatoes that I planted here right next to these rows of corn, they're actually growing over into the rows of corn. I was in picking corn earlier today, and the cherry tomatoes growing in between the rows of corn. That's how far they're spreading out. I've been picking cherry tomatoes for about 2 weeks now. The larger tomatoes, maybe a week or so, I've just started, and the bulk of my tomato harvest is yet to come. So my wife will be doing lots of spaghetti sauce hopefully this year. I did plant a few cherry tomato plants, a little, I can't remember what it's called, it's a little like salad tomato. They're like twice the size of cherry tomatoes. I have a couple of those. And then I have a variety of larger tomatoes like Big Boy and Super Steak, and I can't remember what else. Was there one called Best Boy, or a couple huge types of tomatoes. I like them for juicing for the sauce. We don't usually, since we juice our tomatoes rather than cooking them down, we don't use the Romas for our sauce just because they're very meaty, and if you cook them down you get a good result, but they don't have as much juice in them. So to juice them you just don't get as much per tomato. So it's easier to just use the big, the big giant tomatoes and quarter them or eighth them and put them through the juicer that way, and you get the results. So that's what we've been using. The sweet corn here, this is Honey Select. I think I told you about that. I was in here earlier today and I picked most of the cobs off. I had pulled, I think maybe 3 or 4 days ago was the first one that I pulled off, maybe a week, I can't remember, to see. They were just starting to come in, but by today the majority were ready to pick. I still have a few in there you might be able to see that are still growing. But this has been amazing to me how with this chicken manure here, the size of these cobs is unbelievable. I will have a small addition to this video at the end to show you a few that I husked earlier. I did a quick video that I'll stick on the end. I mean, I've got some cobs that are almost 10 inches in size as far as length goes, and for sweet corn, that's unbelievable. I had a few plants here that had more than one cob on them. Again, for around here, for sweet corn, that's unbelievable. Usually you get one cob per stalk, but and not all of them were that great. Some of them didn't do as well. Again, I have the weed problem here like I have in my other gardens with not being able to really get rid of the weeds in the rows. The ground is bare, of course, in between the rows where I tilled, and you can see there's still some smaller cobs in there that I'll probably harvest in a few days or so, and I'm sure that they're completely dried out. But down in this section of the garden, again, I got this weed issue going on, but there are some pepper plants in here. They're finally starting to grow. Usually for me, the peppers, the sweet peppers, and the red or green peppers, they tend to not do much early in the summer. They just kind of sit there, and then towards the end of the summer they just kind of push. And I do have a couple green peppers on some of them and a lot of blossoms, so I'm thinking that in September I'll get my pepper harvest out of there. And again, you can see there are more of these tomato plants down through here too. One other thing that I just wanted to show you here, we talked before in one of my other videos about my experiment with the no planting onions and potatoes, and I told you I'd give you an update on that. Well, this might not be an experiment that works too well. I don't know for sure yet because I haven't pulled them out of the ground, but this section right here is where the onions were put in, and I think you can see that there are a few onion stalks in there, but I obviously did not put enough hay down to keep the weeds choked out. And I don't want to start trying to pull weeds because I don't know what else I'm going to be pulling up. It's not like they're in rows and so on. Now, this second section here where I had done the potatoes, again, you can see that there are some spots where the hay was thick enough. You can see right Right about there, there's some tomato or potato plants that are drying up, which is what you want. The potatoes are ready to harvest when they're completely dry. So in amongst all these weeds, I don't know what I'm going to have underneath there as far as potatoes. I had like, I think 30 that germinated and came up through the hay. But it's been just a nightmare with these weeds. So either it's not a good way to do it, or I just have to double my thickness, I guess, of hay over top of them to choke out any of these other. Either that or I have tougher weeds than most people have. I don't know. But it's a mess here because of this. It's not the way I want my garden to look, but it was an experiment this year. And just didn't turn out the way I wanted. I do in this mess here, there's 1, 2 volunteer tomato plants that came up from leftover from last year. I'm not sure what variety they are. Once I see tomatoes on, we'll see, because I had tomatoes in this section of the garden last year. So we'll see what we get out of that. But all in all, it's been a pretty successful garden year. Despite the problems that I had early on with it being so cold, and then it got really wet after I planted that I had to do some replants. That's what happened to my broccoli. I had put out a dozen broccoli plants in that part of the garden. They all drowned when we had early rain in June. And then I put some seeds in a couple weeks later, and they started to come up, but then they got choked out right away by weeds. So no broccoli from the garden this year, unfortunately. We do like the broccoli too. So, and but the rest has been, I can't complain. I mean, the corn down here, the corn up at the upper garden wasn't too bad. I should have watered that a little more, that Temptation variety up there. We did get some good cobs. We had some that were small, some that didn't quite pollinate well, but had good flavor. This Honey Select has excellent flavor, and I wish I had put more in here. I just didn't have more room in the garden for it here. So, but the key is going to be next year to see if I can score some extra chicken manure somewhere else, maybe from one of these commercial farms. I don't know. The amount that these 14 chickens or whatever it is that we have here, as you can see them down in there grazing, and I just mowed that section of the field yesterday, so it's like a bug a bug smorgasbord for them down there. They just absolutely love scratching through there with all the bugs that were in those in the field. So but yeah, chicken manure seems to be the answer. Actually, what I was told is chicken manure is the best manure for growing things because it's the highest in nitrogen. Now, not all garden crops need the same thing, but certainly for corn, you can see there even with the tomato plants that the high nitrogen certainly helped the green part of the plant grow. And even the beans here, there wasn't as much chicken manure over in this part of the garden, but the rows of beans are really look healthy this year too, as far as that goes. This mess, I don't know, I've got to rethink this for next year. Do I want to bother with potatoes and onions? Do I want to try get extra hay and build a much thicker mat so that I can keep the rest of this choked out? I don't know. When I get to the end of the summer, when I go to harvest the potatoes and whatever onions are in here, I'll show you what they look like. If they don't look substantial enough, then I won't try that again. But if it works, hey, you know, it was a whole lot less work than the way I'd normally plant them. So at any rate, stay tuned for the quick view of the few cobs of corn that I husked to show you how big they are. And I'll give you a final update on the garden when we get to the potatoes and the onions. But I thank you for watching, and I hope that your summer's going well and that your garden's growing well and you're able to put plenty of food away for your family for the winter and enjoy the bounty of God's creation with the fertile soil and the bright warm sunshine and the rain and the manure from the animals helping to all produce food for us to eat. So thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing to our channel, and please also hit the notifications bell so that when I put more videos out there that you're notified about them right away. Please let your friends know about this, and there will be more videos to come of country living on a shoestring. Thank you for watching. Here are a few cobs of the Honey Select sweet corn from the lower garden that I told you about. This is these were some of the better ones, but this is not untypical of what I got out of there. As you can see, we're talking almost a 10-inch cob from them. That's pretty amazing to me. So I just wanted to show you what they look like, you know, after they were husked, so you can get an idea how good this corn turned out this year. Sorry, I'm fooling with the camera here, but I just wanted to kind of show you. And they're full, very thick, pretty fully formed. So I'm thrilled with how this corn turned out for us. So this is Honey Select. It's an extra sweet yellow sweet corn. So I just wanted to give you that tip about that part of my garden for this year.